Welcome everybody to our conversation this afternoon as we gear up for Celebrate Trails Day. Today, I am so excited to be with Rachel Fussell from PeopleForBikes. They're great partners of Rails to Trails Conservancy. We do so much together on the advocacy front at the federal level, and thrilled to talk today about how trails make a difference for the planet, which is a really exciting conversation this year in particular, because it's not every year that Celebrate Trails Day and Earth Day coincide. Celebrate Trails Day is always the fourth Saturday in April. So it's one of those things, once in a while, they will overlap. And so we're really excited to have this chat with everyone today. And, Rachel, as we get started, I want to think a little bit about, there are just so many ways that trails serve the health of people and places and the environment. And lots of folks, when they think about how trails provide connections to nature, they build appreciation for the environment through those connections, right? It's like kind of building stewardship. You see the nature around you. I always talk to folks, like, in urban environments, we don't always know what's here. You don't always know that there's that stream or this wildlife, and trails just kind of bring you there right away, which is so awesome. And people also talk a lot about the green infrastructure qualities of trail, part of flood mitigation strategies. There's so many ways that communities are looking at trails as part of how they're building kind of resilience into their planning. And a lot of times I would say that people on Celebrate Trails Day, which is a lot about, events and getting out on trails and whatnot, people are thinking about trail stewardship, and they're thinking about cleanups, and they're thinking about those kinds of activities. And all of that is super important and super meaningful, but it is not at all what we're going to talk about today. What I want to really talk about and dig in with you, and why we invited PeopleForBikes to be a part of this conversation, is just about the role of trails in helping people start to swap out car trips for walks and bike rides. A lot of people don't realize that there's a significant impact that our transportation sector has on the health of our climate. It's one of the largest sources of emissions, and the majority of car trips that are taken in the US are within a short walk or a bike ride. And you think about that, it's like, it's not that overwhelming then if it's a short. What is short? Within 20 minutes or so. I think a lot of people automatically are like, oh, well, biking to work seems hard, part of my commute. But we're not always talking about or thinking about how many short trips and close to home trips we might take in a kind of daily, in our day-to-day lives. So thinking about it from your experience, what do you think it takes for people to kind of make that connection and to start to make bicycling part of their everyday? What does that look like for you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be part of this conversation and part of Celebrate Trails Day. But as it relates to that question, you're totally right. I think I was looking at some numbers recently, and the Department of Energy was saying that I think it's the majority of households, like 60% of vehicle trips were less than 6 miles. And I think 75% were less than 10 miles for households. So that right there is a really good starting place to say, okay, maybe I don't want to do this every single day, but you can really start to enjoy yourself using the trails, getting outside. The mental and physical health benefits with that is just so important. And I think, like you said, to start off with, trails help that, to incorporate that into our lives. So whether it's your commute, trips to get essentials like errands, meeting friends, sometimes like going out to, grab drinks or to go get food. I think riding your bike always makes the experience more enjoyable and fun, especially when they're on trails, when you can really enjoy the scenery, relax a bit, and not have to worry about traffic as much. So if you are new, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to chime in and say, thinking about it in like 6 to 10 miles, or like, what is, kind of a 20-minute bike ride. It's so like, that's doable, right?
Yeah,
that's doable for most people. Yeah.
Right. And I think when you really look at it that as those smaller chunks, and not like, I have to ride my bike every day and get down on yourself or feel like you have to meet something out there, when if you take it into little digestible chunks, right? So if you're new to biking or you're trying to cut down on your emissions, try by replacing one activity, right? That could be riding to the trailhead on your mountain bike, or running errands. Like, I go to Target because I know it's nearby a trail system. I'll stop there with a good bike lock, or extracurricular activities. So I really think just be kind to yourself. Start off, enjoy it, use it as like a Saturday way to explore your city or your community or your town. And what I like to do too is give myself a little bit of extra time when I haven't done a route before, especially using apps like Trailforks or PeopleForBikes Ride Spot app, I give myself a little bit time to see what routes are out there, what trails do I want to connect with to run these errands or to go meet a friend. And I also like to add a little extra motivation, like add a reward in. So I love donuts and ice cream in the summer. So if I'm riding my bike, I always try to add in, oh, where's the ice cream shop along this route? Or where's the bakery that I can stop in and give myself a little boost? Because I did something that was fun. I did something that was great for the environment. So why not reward myself?
I love that so much because like what you don't know is before we got on, I literally texted my husband and said, it's so nice out and it's been a really hard day at work. Do you think that we could bike to get burgers later?
Yes.
So yes, putting in the reward is 100% a part of the equation. And I can tell you that I think my kids love to bike so much now because they know that there's something delicious happening on the other end.
Right. I think food motivation is a big factor here.
Big time, big
At
time.
least for
And
me.
they don't get the beer yet on the other end, but they do get like a Shirley Temple or something. And they're like, oh, I love this.
Yeah.
This is awesome. So
Same.
let's think about a little bit, so it's doable. I think that was a big part of that question. Like, what does it take? It is doable. It is tangible. But one thing we hear from folks a lot is that they are interested in biking. If we can get past that conversation of it's not just about the work commute, it's not about like being sweaty and dirty when you show up at work,
Yeah.
that's a whole other conversation. But they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to do it without getting mixed in with traffic. And there's a real safety concern and a real fear factor of like, I kind of know what I know, but then am I going to get to a point where I'm stuck and I'm kind of in over my head? And so just thinking about that, what role do you think trails and particularly trail networks serve in helping get more people on bikes and helping to build bicycling in truly as a transportation option for folks?
Yeah. And I think that starts with, for me, trails aren't just for recreation. They connect our communities. They help transport people. They contribute to a healthy lifestyle. They combat climate change by giving people another option instead of driving and getting out of their cars. So I think as a community, we can all be thinking of trails as part of our active transportation planning and infrastructure, and not just these paved streets and highways. And so to me, multi-use paths like rails to trails really help as a gateway or an entrance point to getting folks outside and using bikes as transportation or a way to just have a healthier lifestyle. And so when I used to live in Anchorage, Alaska, for instance, there was a wonderful trail and greenway system. And yes, I had to drive or bike 1 mile on a paved road, but then I saw that there was these interconnectedness with the trails. And it just took me looping up with the local bike group to ask like, hey, I'm actually new. I was right out of college. I didn't own a car at that time. And I was like, how do I get around? And they were really helpful to say, this is the trail system. And my favorite part of my commute to work was on using that greenway. I got to see moose. I got to connect with people on the trail and say hello. And I really think looking at the trails, like Ride Spot, for instance, is an app that PeopleForBikes created. It has routes where people are already doing them. So you have this great network of folks that are already using bikes as for lots of different reasons. Yeah. And it shows you like, oh, I did this route to this ice cream shop, or this was how I got to my groceries this week. So having, and then it has like different trails and things on it. But I think being able to stress less, relax more, enjoy the scenery, that's where really trails shine, in my opinion, especially with, roads are not necessarily the friendliest for beginners or even those who have been on them for a long time. So using trails as a way to support active transportation and getting more people on there. Because again, like on the weekends, we see greenways and multi-use paths packed. Yeah. And there's a reason for that. We want to be outside. We want to be interacting with our fellow community members and breathing the fresh air and getting some exercise in. So I think trails are really going to be the building blocks for transportation for everyone to enjoy, not just those who are comfortable enough to be on the road.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And that comfort factor is huge. And something I do, and, not to be like, about my kids, but something I do with my middleest child, who is 8 years old, is his route to, he really wants to bike with mom to work and then to school and all those things. His route to school it has this little chunk of trail and then it's like on road and up a hill on road. It's terrible. It's awful. So we don't do it all that often. But when summer camp comes along, the summer camps, we actually try to pick summer camps that are close to the trails so that we can make that part of
It's a great
lower
idea.
stress, right? You don't have to be there for like the 7:05 bell or whatever. It's a little bit of a more relaxing morning, but trying to build in like this is a really great way to get around and like build that
Mhm.
physical activity in. But I love what you said about kind of recreation as a gateway. And when we think about the trails that exist in the country, there's 40,000 miles of multi-use trails. And all of those trails were built, just in the last 30 to 40 years, right? Those trails have come
Wow.
online. If you think about 50 years ago, the idea of even like kind of biking on a trail or walking on a trail was a really new concept. And we've come so far in like people understand and are demanding that this trail access exists because it's a space they want to be. And now
Mhm.
as we shift to like, how do we connect all of this infrastructure? How do we connect the trails with the sidewalks, with the protected bike lanes, so that if you are at any ability level, you can really use these for the recreation and the transportation that you want to,
Exactly.
right? It's fundamental to like our quality of life. It's fundamental to our physical and it's fundamental to our planet. And I think looking at
Yes.
the Earth Day kind of connection here, helping people understand that those investments really are part of what it takes to change people's behavior
Mhm.
because we know people want to do it. It's just like how. The
Right.
how becomes really hard,
Right. And
right?
breaking down those barriers. Exactly. I couldn't agree more.
I also really love what you said about the Saturday rides and like making this make it fun the first time. Don't like the day that you have to be at work at 8:45 a.m., like ready to go for a huge meeting is probably
Rushing.
not the first day to
Yeah,
try to bike commute. But if you do it, map it
exactly.
out like on a Saturday and kind of take it in those bite-sized chunks, it makes it suddenly you're like, oh, this isn't hard at all.
Yeah.
Like this is kind of par for the course. So,
Right.
we hear from folks all the time how much they value trails and they do think that they're important to the community. We actually did a poll
Mhm.
at the end of last year, just asking folks about different perceptions of trails. 90% of Americans said that trails are an important and valuable asset to their community. So that's like almost everyone,
That's
which is kind
huge.
of incredible. But there's also a lot of folks who have said, even though trail use and bicycling is still up in the US post pandemic, 2/3 of Americans want to use trails more than they
Wow.
do. But things that prevent them from using trails, especially women and especially people of color, are issues about concerns around safety, concerns around signage, and just kind of like being confident about where they're going and like understanding where they're going. And programs and activities, like having things that's like that. You said you called the bicycle, the local kind of bicycle club in Anchorage, or like, is there an event I can go to make
Yeah.
this a comfortable space for me? So when you think about that, you think about those barriers and kind of like how can we help get more people on bikes, using bikes and trails as part of their everyday
Mhm.
activities. What are some things you've seen work across the country that kind of take the experience of bicycling and make it more inclusive, make it more kind of part of people's lives?
Yeah. So actually, I'm going to start off with I went to this really amazing conference recently, the California Trails and Greenways Conference. And this was one of the focus, like one of the main focus was how do we bring people in? How do we make trails and greenways more inclusive? And I was really inspired to see that the community trail efforts are increasingly focused on providing equitable access to trails, which can really create that substantial benefits for public health and quality of life. And unfortunately, in many areas across the US, access for trails is inequitably distributed and can be less abundant in lower income neighborhoods with a larger share of minority residents. And this has just been exacerbated by a history of segregation in public
Yeah.
places.
Yeah.
So, but I do think the benefit of parks and trails is greatest for those who do live closest to these resources, like actually being able to bike out at your front door and have a trail
Yeah.
right nearby.
Yeah.
And that disparity in access can have significant health and social and economic implications. So I do think I would love to see even more cities and towns improving access by incorporating trails and pathways as part of the planning process. So like
Yeah.
before we build anything, we should have planning, development, and revitalization standards for these
Yeah.
communities. And then really moving again, like trails are multifunctional, moving beyond trails as just a recreational amenity, but really incorporating trails as a critical contributor to goals in public health and our climate resiliency, our cutting down on emissions and transportation.
Yep.
So I want to like start there just by saying like, I think it's going to take all of us to really push our public
Totally.
policymakers to continue to use trails
Yeah.
as a multifunctional asset to communities.
Yeah.
But
Agreed.
I think with this conversation around equity, I know myself being a female mountain biker, being in the space at first was intimidating, and being surrounded by a lot of other males and trying to figure out where my place was. And I think I would ride by myself a lot. But as soon as I figured out that there were other women and other groups riding, I think this was huge benefit. So checking out local bike shops, they typically do rides every week. I've been seeing a lot of wonderful examples of women of color, people of color getting on bikes, but using the group ride as the way to encourage and provide a lot of joy in these spaces. Also, as I said, I used to run a mountain bike organization, and we would really started to understand that our trail system was also a transportation system, and how do we use those? So really connecting with them if you're interested in it, but a little nervous or feeling like you're not represented in your current community by either bicycles or trails, connecting with these organizations who are really embracing what's happening and trying to move forward, and also finding a buddy. I felt like I found one person that happened. I saw her riding around, and I was like, went up to her and I was just like, do you want to ride bikes with me? Which I know feels a little intimidating at this day and age, but it ended up being a wonderful way to meet people. And that was my riding buddy. And she really helped me. She knew places that I didn't know about. She helped me find different ways, and vice versa. I also like, this was the route I take, and this is how I like to ride. So I think putting yourself out there in the communities that you do feel safe and you do feel supported, and bringing them in helps to raise all the ships.
I do love that. And we have, when you talk about kind of the community planning and what does planning look like in terms of inclusive practices at the local level, we have a great equitable trail development toolkit on our website. So for folks who are watching, definitely check it out if that's what you're interested in. And it walks through a lot of those practices and a lot of kind of examples of what's happening across the country with that regard. And it does take all of us to be pushing for that as the standard for us to make the change, right, across the country. And what we want is equitable access, and we want equitable programming, and we want it to be community led. And one of the things I think that's so exciting about Celebrate Trails Day is that it is community. You know, we create kind of the moment, like, this is the day. If you want to be a part of it, please be a part of it. But there are events happening all across the country with so many different partners, and they look and feel like and are kind of representative of what the community wants to do. So in Baltimore, Black People Do Bike is hosting its second annual Baltimore Cyclovia. And last year was just this huge kind of family community event right on a trail to kind of introduce folks to, like, this trail is here and it's going to be part of this system, right? And to get people excited about what does that mean to be a part of a system, and what does that connect into? And there's several events happening with Latino Outdoors, similar, kind of bringing people out to trails, introducing them to that space in the community, making it a space where kind of everyone can come together. And the idea of safe spaces, and where women and people of color, and even when it comes up of like commuting to work, and like, not that that's the only place that we take bike trips, but commuting to work, you know, a guy commuting to work versus like a lady commuting to work is a totally different experience. You know, we did a whole thing at work back in October. It was a swap a trip challenge, and we encouraged staff to kind of, for as many days and as many miles as they could, like, swap out different trips. And I documented my journey and ended with like, and this is what I look like when I get to work. And I have like my cell phone, and I'm like putting on makeup and brushing my hair. Because like, that is a reality, right? I like pack my clothes in my bag, and, you know, sorry for folks in August, it's a totally different experience than in October. But it is true. And I think helping to just kind of increase the representation of that, the storytelling of the experience of like really building kind of bicycle use into our lives in a different way, making a huge difference. And let's talk about that. Totally normalizing it. Let's talk a little bit about equipment, because having access to the trail is part of the story, like knowing and believing you can do it, having the social support, like, yes, like, we're going to do this, we're going to make this part of our everyday lives. As everyone now knows, I've got kids, and biking around with kids is a lot of extra different work. I don't yet have an e-bike. I desperately dream of having an e-bike at someday, but I want to hear a little bit about, you know, especially from PeopleForBikes' perspective. You guys are experts in this space. How do you think e-bikes factor in when we talk about making it more accessible to make biking kind of part of our our day to day, swap those trips out.
Yeah. So for me, e-bikes are the great equalizer, right? In all forms of that word, all sense of that word. So for first time riders or those who are dipping their toes into trying to replace car trips, e-bikes are the perfect way to transition, right? As you're talking about, a good example is maybe I don't want to show up to work sweaty and gross. And an e-bike can help me do that, right? Like it can help me not have to go through the rigmarole of, having to take a shower, it feels like that's one way it could be useful. And then on like the hills, for instance, with the e-assist, which if folks don't know, there's class one e-bikes that go up to 20 miles per hour, but the motor stops producing energy basically when you stop pedaling. And typically when we talk about trails, we're talking about class one, multi-use wide path. We're talking about class two, which does have a throttle, but again, it does have pedal assist. So you're pedaling and the throttle and it stops at 20 miles per hour. So with those types of bike, depending on what you're doing, if you have a heavy load, for instance, if you have a cargo bike that has something on the back and you want to carry groceries, or if you have kids, right? Like if you're taking your kids to school, if you have trails that allow you to do that, it really makes both the hills, the trip in itself, the miles less daunting, and really just like, oh yeah, this is what I'm going to be doing at, less than 20 miles per hour on a bike. And again, still enjoying all those amazing things that bikes provide, the health benefits, being outside, enjoying that time with your kids, or just getting to know your community. So there really is an e-bike that's perfect for anything that you're looking to do, whether again, running errands or moving your kids along to summer camps or going to school, but then also eMTBs, for instance, using e-bikes as a way to get to the trailheads instead of creating more parking for cars where you just put your bike on a big truck or your car. You can just bike there, and that increases the more miles, increases the enjoyability, and it gets you on those trails. So I really think that e-bikes have been the great equalizer in getting more folks to say, hey, I actually can ride my bike to the trails, or I can just ride my bike on that crazy uphill that I have been nervous to do because I have, either I haven't ridden my bike in a while, or I want to get back into it, or I'm just looking to have a more leisurely experience on my bike when I'm doing other things like going to get a smoothie or going, to get coffee.
I have to say, there's a lady when I bike to work, there's a lady who literally passes me. She's got like 2 kids in the car, go every single day. She's like, and I'm like, later, super jealous of you right now. But I do think there's a misperception for folks who haven't used an e-bike before that it does all the work for you. And I think it's so important. You're still getting the health benefit. You have to pedal, and you still have to do the work. It just kind of helps to balance it out. It helps to, I feel like it's like it smooths out the experience. So you're not quite as winded. You're not quite as tired. You can go further distances if you need to. I think thinking about those 6 to 10 miles, like 6 miles is like, okay, that's super, doable. 10 miles for a lot of folks could be like too far, right? And an e-bike helps totally level that playing field, I think.
Exactly. Yeah. And I've seen some folks, sorry, go ahead.
Go for it.
Well, I've seen some folks on e-bikes just like doing all the things with their e-bike, like everything that, I once thought was like, oh, that seems so hard or would be prohibitive in some form. E-bikes just help really to push the boundaries and help to say, like, do I actually need to use my car in this instance? And just help make that decision making easier.
Totally. And maybe you had shared earlier that with us before we went on air that you live in Vermont, and some of this might be a bit of a Vermont thing too. You guys have such a penchant for being active outside, and you have a lot of hills.
Yes, we have a lot of hills.
You have a lot of hills. I try really hard to swap out as many car trips for trail trips when I can. It's, maybe a perk of the job we have at Rails to Trails Conservancy, just like you guys, right? It's a extra motivator to want to build in what we're talking about, into our daily lives. And I have to say, the biggest difference that for me that was made was being able to accept imperfection. I think I used to think if I was going to do this, I had to like sell my car and do this all the time. And if I wasn't doing it perfectly, like I wasn't doing it. And the reality is even swapping, one trip once in a while makes such a huge difference. And I'm trying really hard to model that for my kids. I'm trying really hard to, share that with my friends and my family. Like all of this is really possible. I think another big game changer for me, and you mentioned this about like the Ride Spot app. We have the Trail Link app. It's a little different. Ride Spots, all different bicycle routes. Trail Link helps you find multi-use trails in different ways. But having
Awesome.
access to these resources to be able to understand what's around you, what's going to happen. I'm going to take the trail here. I kind of pair those tools with Google a lot to like plug in the address and be
same.
like, okay, I can kind of ground truth what's happening with Ride Spot and Trail Link and really understand what my experience is going to be. But just thinking about kind of folks who are watching, folks who might be interested in this and haven't ever done it before, do you have any advice for like, they're interested in making this change, they want to build swapping car trips in for bike rides? What do you say? What do you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying, like, I also feel that need to, if I'm going to be a model, I need to go all in. And that's not true. You can be a model by using your bike and replacing a car trip once a week. Again, this idea of perfectionism is not serving us, basically.
No.
And checking out.
Answer, no. Ask Brene Brown. No, not
exactly.
serving us.
Not serving us. And even if you do that once, for a mile trip down the road for whatever brings you joy or happiness, that's leading by example and modeling those great things. So for me, I also use the Ride Spot and Google for suggested routes to get me started and to kind of track my ride. I also like that little bit of dopamine, like, oh yes, I did that today. Like I tracked my ride, it's on there. But like every little bit of motivation really helps. And again, start small, be kind to yourself. Every little bit helps reduce our emissions and gives you joy because you're in the sunshine or rain sometimes, but you're still getting outside. And I think also building in time for that planning portion, like you're saying, like finding what works for you. Is it Trail Links? Is it Ride Spot? Is it Google? And I love maps and I love finding my way around town on my bike. It feels like a mini adventure that I'm discovering something new about this place that I've lived in, and trails and bikes help me to really explore that and discover that. But I would say giving yourself some time to plan out your route and know where you're going. I know that Ride Spot has you can put on your bike and it will talk to you as your route's like turn right in 400 feet. So sometimes I'm not even paying attention. I'm looking at the scenery around me and I miss it completely. But that's part of it, of like finding your way around. And so I think giving yourself some time to plan, be kind to yourself. And if you have to go on the street, which a lot of times, not all of us are able to ride bike right from our house straight to the trailhead. But if you're nervous about that, again, just being gracious with yourself and generous and saying like, okay, if I can do less than a mile, I will try that. I will go slow and maybe start right on the sidewalk if that's permissible.
Totally.
So
I know that some people might be like, don't get on the sidewalk. And I know that's not ideal, but if you get in a situation where you are uncomfortable, getting on the sidewalk is sometimes the best answer.
And just be courteous
you can
to those
even
walking.
get off. Yeah, and walk your bike on the sidewalk. My route into the office, I go through Georgetown in DC, which in the morning is very, very quiet. And so it is like a low stress, and low stress for folks who don't know that term is a road that is traffic, fewer than 2 lanes of traffic and typically less than 25 miles an hour. And so it's very low stress. There's not a lot of people on the road and whatnot, but in the afternoon, it can be really intense. And depending on the day, there's really not even any room for the bike. And so it becomes, and drivers are angry because they want to get home, and it just becomes a lot more intense. And so having to be kind of on a sidewalk on occasion and being respectful to everyone in that space is my solution. It's not a perfect solution, but back to embracing the imperfections, because I think that's a big part of this. We have not historically in our country made it easy for people to get around without a car. So if it's something you're trying to do, even if it's for a trip a week, it's a Saturday errand, it's a little league game that you're going to get to, and you got some extra time to spare and kind of figure it out. I think embracing the messiness of it is also part of what makes it fun. Or building in the time. You got to see moose in your bike rides in Alaska. I have yet to bump into a moose in DC, but we do bump into deer all the time. And we have to save time to take pictures of the deer. Like it's like a habit. Like it's like, okay, there are deer. We have to stop and take a picture. It's really
Yes,
exciting. So
you can get
um,
excited.
you do, and it's part of the joy. And so I think making it fun, also thinking about gear, I was really overwhelmed
Mhm.
by thinking about like colder weather biking and like, what does that
Yeah.
mean? What does that look like? And I had a colleague give me some great advice. Like you can buy so much stuff, but he was like,
Oh,
what you
yes.
really need is wind. Like if you could get like rainproof wind pants and like a
Mhm.
rainproof wind jacket,
So smart.
it blocks the cold and you can layer under that. And then you basically have one set of gear that covers you for 4 seasons because you can wear that when it's
Year
raining in
round.
the summer, you can wear that. When it's snowing in the winter, you just kind of add on layers underneath. And it was the best
Yeah.
advice. And I have used those pants and that jacket, nonstop. And so thinking about some of the little kind of hacks that you can build in
Mhm.
to make it comfortable, to make it easy. But I think the
Right.
biggest message is, you don't have to do it every single trip, and swapping even 1 or 2 trips and making that part of your everyday is good for your body. It's good for the planet, and it's good for your
Yeah.
heart, right? It's good for
Exactly.
your joy factor goes up. So really, really awesome.
Exactly.
And definitely check out Ride Spot's a great tool. TrailLink is a great tool.
Yeah.
Everyone, access those. They do different things. So they're really complementary. And I think
Mhm.
really useful for folks as they're figuring out kind of the right ways to build this into their life. Rachel, this was awesome. I loved
Yes,
doing
thank
this
you.
with you, and I hope to be in Vermont sometime soon and get to visit and go on an e-bike ride because I don't
Exactly, I
do
hope so
I don't do the
too.
hills all that well.
The heels on an e-bike are definitely much more enjoyable.
Game changer, game changer. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, and I hope
Thank
that you'll get
you.
out on the trail on Celebrate Trails Day, April 22nd.
I will. I'm making a plan already. So thank you so
Awesome.
much, Brandy. Thank
Thank
you.
you. We'll
Have a
see you
wonderful
soon.
day. All right.
Bye bye.
Bye.